Hey everyone, I hope that you guys are doing amazing wherever you are in the world. My name is Shikha and I welcome you to my channel. As always, I'm so grateful that you're listening, subscribing, and commenting. I really appreciate the support. And if you're interested in supporting me further, you can do that by going to my Patreon or Ko-fi link. They're both in the description below. As you can see, I'm in my backyard today because I thought it was a nice day, and instead of sitting inside and doing videos inside, I thought I'd change it up a bit. Let's see how this works out. Hopefully the audio quality is good enough. In this one, I wanted to speak to you guys about conditioning and something that I've been thinking about a lot recently because of a lot of different things that have been coming up for me. And one of the things that I wanted to say to you about conditioning is that obviously, and I'm becoming more aware of it as well, that most of us, all of us, very few of us are actually aware of the fact that we are conditioned in so many different ways. But most of us, including me, in so many different ways, we are so completely unaware of so many different things, in so many different ways in which we are conditioned to believe a certain way. We're conditioned to believe a certain thing. I mean, we never really actually sit down and question all this stuff, obviously, because who does that? Who has the time to do that, right? Who has the time to think about all the different ways that we're conditioned? If we actually sat down and thought about all this stuff, we would have no time left over to do real work or to do anything else, perhaps. But I think what's going on with the coronavirus thing, perhaps with the pandemic, because of the lockdown or because of the increased amount of time that people have on their hands, in general, I'm finding for myself at least that I have more time to think about things that I normally did not think about at all in the past, especially in terms of conditioning. Recently, I saw a post that said something like, the first thought that you have about something is the conditioning that you have in regards to that particular item. And the second thought you have with regards to something is what is your actual inclination, or what makes you your personality, or what makes your characteristics, or what makes you up as a person, right? So for example, the person used an example of the fact that the first thought that they have when they see an individual or when they see a really beautiful girl is that, oh my god, she must be a completely terrible person because she's so beautiful. There's no way she has both personality or and beauty, something like that, right? And then the second thought she has, no, that's weird. Why would I think that way? She's obviously a nice person. I don't know anything about her. She must be a nice person. Unless she does something that proves to me that she's not a nice person, why would I think that she's not just because she's beautiful or something like that, right? And I noticed that this kind of first instinct, like first conditioning, that thought that you have instantaneously when something comes up in front of you, that conditioning is very common in a lot of us. And I think that's the basis, I think, for racism or classism or fatism or all of those different biases that we have, or things that we have that basically put someone else in a negative perspective or a negative position. In a lot of ways, when we sit down and we look at certain people, we have certain opinions of them, and we look at certain people and we're like, yeah, that person must be that because they are this color, or they must eat that because they are that from that race, or whatever it might be. There are these kind of things that are stereotypes, we call them, but it's basically conditioning, because people are different no matter what you look like or no matter where you are from. There's so many differences among people, even if you're from the same country, or if even if you're from the same family. Sometimes you have different conditioning, different ways of thinking, different ways of looking at the world. Recently, I'm noticing that a lot of racism against Asian people has been perpetuated because of the fact that coronavirus came from Asia, or from China particularly. It seems to have come from there. And I noticed that there, as I said, in Canada even, where I imagine that is not as I think that is not as racist as America, there's still a lot of racist acts, violent racist acts being committed against Asian Canadians. And I read recently about this particular act against an Asian Canadian teenager who was just riding around on his bicycle, a very young little kid, who was violently beaten up by a racist Caucasian Canadian man who said that he was the reason why, they were suffering because of the lockdown, because of coronavirus. It was kind of funny to me when I'm thinking about this, because of course this is absolutely absolutely the result of conditioning. There is no way this individual, if he had thought about it consciously, if he just sat down and thought about it consciously and said, okay, this person, this Asian Canadian teenager who's probably never been to Asia, has never been back home, he probably lived all his life in Canada, he's probably born and brought up here, probably doesn't perhaps speak the language, or he's more Canadian than I am sometimes. And so, how could he have anything to do with the idea, bees, the idea that there might be that he might be the reason for coronavirus? That this particular individual, just because he's Asian, has anything to do with the fact that I'm suffering because of the lockdown or because of coronavirus? Why would this particular individual have anything to do with it? And what is my beating him up going to do anything, right? So if he had just taken a second to think about it, he would not have beaten this person up because there's no reasoning behind it. There's no logical reasoning behind it. He's not the reason for it. He wasn't the person who ate the first bat. He definitely has nothing to do with the spread of the virus. A lot of it has to do with the Caucasian Canadians here who are not actually locking themselves up and who are actually outside in parks and not social distancing, things like that, right? So if he actually thought about it logically, he would have realized that no, it's not because of this individual particularly. But of course he didn't, and he just let his conditioning dictate his actions. And the conditioning said Asian Canadian, he's an Asian Canadian, or he's Asian. Didn't think about the Canadian part, I'm sure. So he's Asian, and therefore he is the reason why we have this coronavirus incident here. He's the reason why we're going through all of these problems here. He's the reason why we have the lockdown, and that's why I must beat him up, right? So the conditioning said that. It wasn't logical reasoning. And it wasn't the fact that if he had taken just a moment to think about it, he wouldn't have said that, yes, it's his fault, right? And so I'm noticing this comes up a lot, especially in situations right now where you have a few seconds just to think and you have a little bit more time right now, a lot of us do. And we can just sit back and think, all right, is this actually true, what I'm thinking right now? Is this actually true? Or is it just based on my conditioning, on my parents having told me this, or my society having told me this, or the universe, or something that's not real telling me that this is true, right? And a lot of times what you'll notice with conditioning is that it's just society telling you this, that they taught you that this is true and that's why you believe that it's true. One of the examples I can think of is that, women who were raped actually brought it upon themselves because they were wearing a short skirt, or they were being sexy, or they were, being flamboyant in some way. And a lot of times when you do actually the research and you study it up, you realize that a lot of these women were actually completely covered up. They were wearing long pants, long sleeve shirts, or a jacket or a coat, or they were not flamboyant. They weren't provocative in any way. They were just walking around doing their own thing, and they were raped. And so conditioning teaches us that it's because it's their own fault. Conditioning in terms of society, patriarchal society, tells us it's the woman's fault. Of course it's the woman's fault. She was the one who caused this man to feel like he had to do it. It wasn't the man's fault, of course. And so conditioning says that. But when you actually sit down and think about it logically, you're like, who took the action? The man did it. It doesn't matter if the woman was wearing whatever the hell she was wearing. It doesn't matter what she was doing. It was a man who decided that he was going to do it. So again, conditioning versus actually logically sitting down and thinking, okay, what is the actual fact behind it rather than what is conditioning behind it, right? And so I've been noticing, for me particularly, as I'm sitting down here, I'm noticing a lot of conditioning coming up for me where it says, yeah, this is the way it is. And then I take a second to think, but why do I think that this is the way it is? What logical reason do I have to think this way? One of the things that came up for me recently was, the thing that, I really want to go back to Thailand. I really want to go back to Chiang Mai. I want to go back to my home. I really miss it, things like that. And a lot of that brought up things of angst and anxiety and jealousy and all that insecurity for me, where I was like, no, I really don't want to be here anymore. I want to go back home. And then I logically thought about it, and I was like, oh, right, but I'm actually really enjoying myself here, and I'm having a really good time with my family, and I'm actually having loads of fun, and I'm doing a lot of work, and for the next few months, I'm completely fine being here. The conditioning tells me that I really want to go back home because I'm jealous of my friends, or jealous of the people there, or I'm jealous of myself that was there before, or whatever it might be. Conditioning says that. When I actually sit down and think about it logically, no, I'm actually really happy here, and I don't need to worry about anything. There's no need for FOMO. There's no need for fear of missing out or anything like that. It's okay to be here. For this moment in time, I'm actually perfectly happy being here. So again, I'm noticing that I'm actually going back constantly between conditioning versus logical thinking, where I'm like, why do I think this way, and why am I causing myself so much angst or so much anxiety or so much grief because of something that's not even really true? And so I wanted to bring this up for you guys because I'm guessing a lot of especially because sometimes we can be very rigid in our thinking, because that kind of is the way a lot of people think in this way. You know, you kind of form your opinion, you form your bias, and then you just stick with it because until something comes up, and perhaps you change your opinion because of that, or perhaps you don't. You just stick with your first made opinion for the rest of eternity without changing it ever. And so I'm noticing that, as I said, conditioning versus logical thinking, this is something that is coming up a lot for me right now. And I hope that a lot of you are actually sitting down and using this time to really think about what, in your opinion, in your head, in your belief system, is actually conditioning. It's actually just something that people told you to think, versus what's actually the truth. What is the truth here? And how can you make sure that your belief system actually reflects the truth as much as possible, whatever the truth might be in the moment in time, versus conditioning that is based on years and generations of false thinking or traditions or peer pressure or things that are not true anymore, basically, right? I hope this makes sense. I hope I was able to explain myself to you. I really wanted to share this with you because it just came up really poignantly and really strongly for me this morning, and I was like, all right, I'm going to share this with them right away. If you have any questions about this, please do message me below or comment below, and I shall do a follow-up video on this. Again, thank you so much for listening, for being on my channel. I really appreciate it, and I shall see you guys the next time around. Bye for now.